Lindy. So I need to know if everybody can see me. A simple chat yes would do fine. Okay. First of all, I want to thank Lindy, Anna, and Thomas for indulging me and allowing me to present a topic of my own interest in this conference. And secondly, to thank them as well as Katerina Mavromikalu and anyone else that I either have overlooked or don't know who have been working so hard to hold this conference one way or another. With my paper, I aim to assess one aspect of the historiography of Cypriot archaeology by considering developments in prehistory, especially in archaeological theory over the past 60 years. In order to discuss these recent trends, however, I begin by considering the first century of archaeological work on the island. After establishing that background, I discuss the emergence and resilience of culture history, as well as the rise of processual, science-based, and social approaches. I conclude with a few words about the future of theory in Cypriot archaeology. Tim Murray has argued that a knowledgeable historiography is crucial for understanding the formulation and development of archaeological theory. In turn, Oscar Moro Abadia pointed out that from its inception in the 1970s, the history of archaeology was written from an internalist viewpoint, based on the discoveries and techniques of mid to late 19th century pioneers in archaeology. He also contrasts this viewpoint with a no less satisfactory externalist approach, concerned with the ways that contemporary socioeconomic or political conditions have impacted the interpretation of archaeological data. In turn, Bruce Trigger critiqued both internal and external dialogues, as he called them, and suggested that the history of archaeology was to serve as the basis for understanding social development and change. Then archaeologists, quote, archaeologists must strive against heavy odds to see the past as it was, not as they wish it to have been, end quote. Now, given the smorgasbord of theoretical approaches that impact on archaeology today, it's little wonder that archaeologists rarely agree on how to assess knowledge claims or to determine which approach is most appropriate. As we turn to consider the case for Cyprus, we should bear in mind the ways that the history of archaeology may punctuate, clarify, or qualify various rival claims to archaeological knowledge and how they are made or justified. From its antiquarian origins through the resilience of culture history, archaeology in Cyprus passed from its colonial phase to an era of what I call internationalism, embracing first the so-called new archaeology and eventually social archaeology. It's impossible to present all these developments in any depth in this talk, but a brief look at the first 100 years of archaeology on the island is an important first step. The earliest practitioners of archaeology on Cyprus were often diplomats, bankers, or soldiers like the Chesnola brothers, Robert Lang, or Thomas Sandwith. And all of you have a lot more to say about these people than I do. Although often driven by the profits or prestige that resulted from selling antiquities or donating them to foreign museums, some also contributed to Cypriot archaeology by studying or publishing their finds. Lang, for example, uncovered a cache of limestone statuary at Dali in 1869 and eventually recorded the find spots on a plan of the structure where they were found. While Sandwith sold or donated a large assemblage of Cypriot antiquities to the British Museum, He also wrote a paper on the pottery found in Cypriot burial context, perhaps not the equivalent of today's mortuary archaeology, but certainly a step beyond antiquarianism. During the 1880s and 90s, Max Onefals Richter conducted excavations at sites such as Salamis and Tamasos, eventually producing a popular work linking the archaeology of Cyprus to Homer and the Bible. With its echoes of intercultural contacts and the integration of archaeological and ancient literary evidence, such a study with an adjusted time framework, using, for example, Linear B and Ugaritic documents, would certainly not be out of place today. Together with John Myers, he also compiled a catalog of the growing collection in the Cyprus Museum, what Ulbrich and Keeley termed, quote, the first comprehensive archaeological history of the island and of its ancient sites, end quote. Despite such exceptions, 19th century archaeology on Cyprus was essentially antiquarian in outlook, what Goring christened a mischievous pastime. And a staggering amount of Cypriot pottery, sculptures, metalwork, and other minor arts were transplanted to museums throughout and beyond Europe. In 1887, the British High Commissioner Bulwer decided that excavation permits should only go to scientific bodies, such as museums and universities. This proved to be a watershed in Cypriot archaeology and ultimately led to a series of large-scale excavations carried out by archaeologists associated with and funded by the Cyprus Exploration Fund and the British Museum. In principle, intended to ensure that archaeology on the island would be conducted in a scientific manner and at the same time expand the Cyprus Museum collections. In practice, this led to the emptying of multiple tombs at sites such as Enkumi, Kourion, and Moroni, and the dispersal from the island of even more precious art objects. During the first half of the 20th century, archaeology on Cyprus became increasingly international in character, but the antiquities of the island continued to be exported and so enriching private art collections and public museums from Stockholm to Sydney. The fieldwork and subsequent publication of the Swedish Cyprus expedition laid the groundwork for the culture-historical approach to archaeology on the island. Between 1930 and 1960, fieldwork on Cyprus took on a truly international character, with teams from Britain, France, Australia, and America excavating several prehistoric sites, all within the culture historical framework. These include the British at Paleipaphos, Myrtupigades, and Apliki, the Australians at Vounous, the French at Enkumi, and the Americans at Kourion. During the same period, the Cypriot archaeologists Dikios conducted several major field expeditions at Neolithic Kirikatia and Sotira, Chalcolithic Erimi, early and middle Bronze Age Vounous, and late Bronze Age Enkumi. Now, as we move from 1960 to the present, from 1963 to 1989, Vassos Kariorgis served as director of the Cypriot Department of Antiquities and undertook major excavations at several late Bronze Age sites, all firmly rooted in the culture historical tradition. During the 1960s through 1980s, however, a more scientific and multidisciplinary dimension became integrated into the archaeology of the island. To varying extents and with diverse results, the somewhat muted applications of this new archaeology to Cypriot archaeology, largely minus any theory, can be seen in French and British projects at Kirikatia, Calabasas, Moroni, Vrisi, and Lemba, and in the American projects at Idalion, Alhambra, and Episcopi. In the late 1970s, Stanley Price introduced an innovative survey methodology, followed not long after by the intensive survey of the Canadian Paleopaphos Survey Project. Both these projects heralded new trends in regional survey archaeology designed to address problem-oriented questions in an interdisciplinary ambiance. During the 1980s, publications that embraced archaeological theory could still be counted on one hand. Nevertheless, the culture-historical influence in Cypriot archaeology and the overriding concern with the description, classification, and chronological ordering of archaeological data have resulted in an impressive publication record of the island's prehistoric sites and eclectic material culture. Without this vital input of data, always begging for interpretation, archaeological theory on Cyprus would be even less prominent than it currently is. During the 1980s and 90s, fieldwork was often characterized by long-term, multidisciplinary field projects, like those at Sotira Kamenoudia, Marchialonia, or Akrotiri Itokremnos. During the same time period, Cypriot archaeologists also conducted large-scale long-term excavations at major Bronze Age sites, such as at Alassa. With few exceptions, there was at this time still a notable dearth of theoretical studies that sought to engage Cyprus's rich and extensive material record. Not long afterward, however, this picture began to change, notably in a suite of papers published in 1993 in a special issue of the Bulletin of the American Schools of Oriental Research entitled Perspectives on Cypriot Social Complexity. Elsewhere in archaeology at this time, the camaraderie that had characterized the new archaeology had broken down into multiple disciplinary factions. And as a result of its anti-historical bias, processual archaeology faced its own revolution in the form of reaction from post-processual archaeologists. In time, these divisions became more muted as many archaeologists chose to see their work as falling under the banner of social archaeology. On Cyprus, by the turn of the new millennium, a steady stream of new work, none of it categorically processual, post-processual, or social, but often a unique combination of all three, began to typify theoretically oriented studies on the island. It is striking that several women, amongst them Diane Bolger, Priscilla Keswani, Louise Steele, and Jennifer Webb, led the way in this new stream of Cypriot prehistoric archaeology, treating issues such as gender and performance, mortuary rituals, the materiality and agency of water and clay, and ideology, cult, and polity. Amongst Cypriot archaeologists, Maria Iacovu's long-term fieldwork and research project at Paleopaphos has resulted in papers dealing with the island's political geography, social complexity, and landscape transformation. She has also played a founding role in the development of the so-called Cyprocentric approach, widely adopted within the island, but increasingly challenged by others. Of several regional landscape surveys conducted on the island, two interrelated projects headed by Sturt Manning and Kevin Fisher stand out, not least for the striking number of innovative methodological and theoretical studies they have published. Trying to present 160 years of archaeology on Cyprus in 15 minutes means that I have eclipsed the work of many other scholars, a shortcoming partially addressed in the longer version of the paper prepared for publication. And I do mean prepared. One man who cannot be passed over, however, is Edgar Piltenberg, whose theoretical orientations included gendered representations, emergent male elites, household memory, and state formation. Piltenberg's research changed the ways archaeologists think about Cypriot prehistory and his premature death in 2016 was a tragic loss to archaeology on this island. Finally, as we look to the future of theoretical archaeology on Cyprus, we should bear in mind this internalist background, in this case, however, including some contemporary pioneers well aware of the externalist ways that contemporary socio-political or economic conditions have impacted the interpretation of archaeological data. Looking ahead then, many archaeologists working on prehistoric Cyprus have been inspired by archaeological theory, engaging concepts like ideology, gender and the body, placemaking, and rural archaeology. Only a handful of published papers, however, deal with material agency, symmetrical archaeology, or thing theory, and virtually none, except Michael Gibbons' work, has adopted a post-colonial approach. The archaeology of prehistoric Cyprus would benefit from more emphasis on issues such as mobility and connectivity, maritime studies, personhood and identity, and so on, all too rare in studies on prehistoric Cyprus. Despite what might be seen as a shortage of theoretically informed research in prehistoric Cypriot archaeology today, a look backwards indicates that even an abridged historiography such as presented here is useful in gaining a fuller understanding of the development of archaeological theory on Cyprus. I trust the younger generation will continue to adopt and adapt these interpretative trends that contribute positively to theory building and at the same time advance our understanding of Cyprus's prehistoric past. Finally, the ongoing political situation not only precludes access to sites and materials in the northern part of the island, but also means that current work and ideas reflect only about 2/3 of the landscapes, seascapes, and coastscapes of Cyprus. As a result, we cannot engage fully the diversity of material, social, and spatial features essential to analyzing so many aspects of Cypriot archaeology, whether theoretical, culture historical, antiquarian, or historiographic in nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard.